Hello and welcome to another Improve Your Grade the 1% Way. This is the course that helps driving instructors improve their grade step by step on Part 3 tests or standards checks. It helps become a better driver trainer, working on the principle, like I keep saying, we cannot improve Rome in a day, but we can gain each time. Each week, what you do is look at one aspect of one of the competencies and look at how during that week, concentrate for a week or 2 weeks if you want on just improving that element in some way. Now I'm hoping that today's one is not something that, to be honest, anyone really needs any improvement on. But there may be some surprises for people, and there may be some things along the way that you may think, oh yes, I might need to watch that. So what is today's? Well, did the trainer maintain an appropriate, non-discriminatory manner throughout the session? Now when I first put this one up, I thought, oh, it's going to be an easy one. And do you know what? When I actually started putting it together, I thought I could almost write a book on some of this. Some of the things I've seen, some of the things I've heard, the comments I've seen on Facebook and other social media. It really is amazing, actually, when you actually think about it, how much of this many driving instructors get wrong. Now, analysing the question probably doesn't need too much today. Did the trainer maintain an appropriate, non-discriminatory manner throughout the session? It really shouldn't be too difficult. It's basically to maintain an appropriate, non-discriminatory manner. That's all there really is to it. Simple, yeah? Well, let's investigate a little bit further. I think we all know the obvious ones we should not be making. Racisms, sexisms, ageisms, religions, disability, and as I called it, otherisms, etc. Now these are the obvious ones. The problem is if any of us do have any of these inside us, they have a habit of coming to the forefront. My wife can tell immediately almost if anybody is racist towards her a little bit. She just feels it straight away, and various things. So it's something she's used to, but we do need to look out for it. I don't think I need to say too much about those. I think they're fairly obvious, but what about the not so obvious ones? How many of us have said something like typical taxi driver, or white van man again, etc., etc., or the Sunday driver, you know, oh, they're out on a Sunday drive because they're going a bit slow for us. Or the boy racer, the opposite, the Galantis racing around, and we've used expressions like that. I'm going to put the clueless luxury car driver because we've all heard them. Oh, the BMW, the Mercedes Ecto, who apparently don't have signals and don't use their indicators. It was interesting, I saw some research a few years ago now, which actually showed that the BMW driver, Mercedes driver, etc., were no less likely to use signals than any other driver. But this is a thing with when something is brought to your attention. For example, let's say you go out and you buy a yellow car. Now, all you actually ever see when you're out on the road is yellow cars, or you buy a particular brand of car, you know, or a particular make, and all of a sudden that's what you see. And the same thing is with many of these things, you know, because we're looking out for them, because we've got this programmed thing going on in our head, oh, BMW drivers don't signal, you know, that's what we see. So whenever we see it there. So we've just got to watch out for them and realise that the reality is there are good taxi drivers, there are good good van drivers, good Sunday drivers. Young people can drive good, etc. Yes, they can drive bad, but so can middle-aged men of 40 driving Fiats and any other car. The distracted mum is another one we've seen. Learner drivers. Now, this is one which I threw into the pile. How many people have you heard say, oh, learner drivers, you know, etc., etc. They're out there. And I suppose really one of the ones I should have put on there is cyclists. I'm amazed at how many driving instructors complain or run down cyclists. You know, you'd think as a driving instructor that we would all know that the cyclist actually does have the right of priority on our road. It goes back into the history of time when, you know, first of all there were horses and or pedestrians, and pedestrians will always have the right of way, if you want to call it the right of way. The priority is what we prefer to call it. They always have the priority on the public highway. What is a public highway? Well, a public highway is anything from the boundary, the fence boundary on one side, across a pavement, across a road, right the way across the pavement to the other boundary, and that is the public highway. And the first people that have any priority on the public highway is the pedestrian, followed by the horse rider, followed by animals, and farm animals used to correctly herd the animals. And down along the line now we've got cyclists. Cyclists still have that priority. Now, of course, recent changes show that things like, you know, there was an even bigger hierarchy of order now. We've got car drivers and lorry drivers. Lorry drivers have the less rights. They got to, but it's about looking after each other, really. The lorry driver looks after the car driver looks after the cyclist looks after the, you know, etc., etc. I know many people say, oh, it's not right and it shouldn't be right, but how else would we do it? Should we give the autonomy to the cyclist? Now, the cyclist possibly could have learning difficulties. They could have hearing problems. There's nothing from stopping them. So who really should have the decision making? Who really should be the one who makes that decision? The cyclist or the insured, licensed motorist who's taking tests and has to be reasonably competent in order to drive the vehicle? I know which one I'd rather be putting my hands in. And the bus drivers, you know, we've heard these things. Now these, I say, they're not so obvious, some of these, but we need to avoid them. You need to avoid things in your car, saying things around, you know, women and all these things. They've got to be avoided. But I think it's more than that. It's not just avoid them. We need to get rid of them out of our lives so we don't think of them. Pupils complain, and over the years I've heard the most shocking complaints about other things. Things like touching pupils. Instructors touching pupils. Sometimes it's meant with, you know, I knew one gentleman, a lovely guy, and he considered all his pupils like his grandchildren, and he'd want to give them a hug, and he'd be happy just giving them a little touch now and again, and I would put his hand on their legs, and there was no motive in there whatsoever other than he was like their grandfather. But of course, the pupils were complaining to the driving school, and the driving school were ignoring it up to a point. I know the girls in the office at the time mentioned it to me, and the guy came on a training session, and I coached him into realizing how this might not be the best way of responding. Obviously, we've all heard of the bad incidents with instructors touching pupils, etc., etc., etc. And I always like to explain to my pupils that, you know, there is an invisible wall between me and them, and that I will try to stay my side, etc. However, I would explain in the first lesson there are times when I would need to come through that wall, and I would, if it was for the interest of their safety, and I may need to grab the steering wheel, etc. If I do so, there is a possibility I might come into contact with them. I used to warn them because I had a habit of ending up with my nails very long sometimes, and I would try not to hit them with the nails, but if you hit them with the nails, you know, I try to keep them short, but these things happen. So, you know, I used to explain that, and that is when I would come over, but otherwise a wall was never crossed. I shouldn't really need to be saying things like this. I mean, I don't think there's a huge problem there at the moment. But one thing I've heard a huge amount is about the inappropriate jokes and the humour that driver trainers have had with their pupils. Now, to me, we need to keep out of the job. I mean, okay, I mentioned it on another one where I've done research where you've asked pupils, previous pupils who've been having lessons, etc., in some research, you know, if they knew about, had their instructor talk to them about the effects of several pupils or several passengers, sorry, being in the car and how that might affect the vehicle dynamics. And they didn't know. I asked them things like, if they knew how inclement weather could affect the vehicle handling, etc., they wouldn't know. But if you asked them what pub they went to, where their instructor went on holiday, how many children they have, and things like that, they would know. They would tell you jokes that their instructors would tell them. You speak to an instructor and you say, oh, you don't talk to them about these. Well, oh, we haven't got time. Well, yes, there is time. But the inappropriate jokes, you know, I think that. I remember one of the biggest complaints that came to mind once was an instructor who, it came through the parents, and the parents wanted to know why the instructor was talking to their 17-year-old daughter about how every Christmas he went to Thailand and used prostitutes, and how it was okay for prostitution out there because it was an accepted behaviour, and it's how they earned their money and it's how they fed their children, etc. And he went on, you know, basically saying how prostitution was out there. The girl got into a conversation with her parents and saying about, oh, how prostitution was good and it was absolutely acceptable, and why wasn't it allowed to happen in this country, etc. The parents were naturally shocked, wondering where on earth their daughter had got such an opinion, shall we say. And she said, well, my driving instructor, that's what he does, he goes to blah blah blah. Now, she wasn't dobbing in her driving instructor, she was having a conversation, she was sharing this with her parents. Well, you can imagine her parents' horror is finding out that a mature gentleman was talking to their 17-year-old daughter about prostitution and girls in Thailand, etc. It wasn't the only parent that had rung me up about this instructor. I have no idea what the instructor does today. As you can imagine, he doesn't work for us. It was just inappropriate, and I've heard others amazing things that people have done, and they think it's actually good humour or things, and it's not. So just keep it for the pub, really. And discussing personal life is another one. You know, instructors are discussing all sorts about their wives, their children, complaining, telling them how, oh, their wife doesn't understand them, etc., etc. You know, some people misread it into thinking it's chatting up and all sorts, etc. Again, keep it out the car. You know, the lessons need to remain personal. There's no problem with humour, don't get me wrong, there's no problem with humour and having social chat to some degree, but humour can be kept within the lesson. I delivered many classroom training sessions on behalf of the NDORs, the police, etc., and every one of my sessions contained humour, but the humour was within the lesson, it was within the human structure. Very often it was just about looking at people the way I would, you know, when they make some statement like, I always jump through red traffic lights. You can see the problem with that. Or one occasion, one young lad expressed that he bought his car and it didn't have a speedo, and on explanations of why it didn't have a speedo, he was like, well, it wasn't there. There's a hole where the speedo was, you know, and I would, you know, in 23 other people in the room, I say, you do have a second problem with that. Not only is you've also Construction Rules and Regulations Act, driving a vehicle which is not roadworthy. But never mind. People tell their parents, whether negatively or not, and then of course the parents come back to the school, etc. People that do these sorts of things sometimes carry them on into their Part 3 and standards check. They say that they won't and they try hard, but the little signs and the clues are there. But we need to keep them out of lessons, and it's what it's there for. It's a biggie for the DVSA because, you know, I've heard a lot of complaints over my years, and you could probably multiply that by 10,000 to know what the DVSA have heard over the years. Right, well, that's the end of that session for now. I'm when we go on to this point. That's all, folks, except for I'm going to put the shameless plug in again. 31 Lesson Plans is a structured book which I written in conjunction with the DVSA syllabus, etc. So pop over to the website if you're listening. If you want, it's written for you. It keeps things so simple and it follows the standards. It's available. Go to DTE-Elite, DTE-Elite, pop into the shop, and there are other books there. I say I write these books because, you know, I've seen the material out there. I've seen people struggle, and you know, you don't need to struggle. You know, I've done the struggle for you. So, you know, it's just down to you. Free support, DTE-Elite, products, DTE-Elite, and your next video will be next Monday. That's all for now. Thank you very much. Speak to you all soon then. Bye bye.